So I want to take you back to 2001, a long time ago. 2001 was an incredible year for activists. In June 2001, thousands gathered at the World Social Forum, the first one, in Porto Alegre, Brazil, under a shared motto, "Another world is possible." 3 months later, thousands gathered again, this time in Durban, South Africa, for the 4th United Nations World Conference Against Racism. The point of departure for both of these activist gatherings was about imagining and creating another world, a world free of injustices. Tragically, 3 days after the Durban conference concluded, we experienced in this country the tragedy of September 11th, 2001. The activist momentum that had started in Brazil and continued into South Africa had now been overshadowed. And for quite a long time, fear triumphed over hope. These activists who gathered in 2001 knew that this work was going to be difficult, but they showed up to do the work anyways. As some of you may know, we share this tragic date of September 11th with Chile. Democratically elected socialist president Salvador Allende died on September 11th, 1973, as a result of a military coup led by General Augusto Pinochet. Today, in 2019, Chile is experiencing a level of protests on scale unseen in decades. As the protesters there have said, it is not about the 30 pesos, referring to the metro fare hike, but about 30 years. It's been 30 years since the end of the military dictatorship of Pinochet. That dictatorship lasted for 17 years. It's clear that the educational and economic disparities that have become part of Chile's current situation have failed the public majority, and they've had enough. I'm a scholar of human rights and social movements, and I have spent my entire young adult and professional life in these activist spaces. I've always been intellectually curious about how grassroots activists take on powerful systems, structures, and institutions to either transform them, to interrupt them, to challenge them. It's always been fascinating to me the ways in which they're able to take on powerful forces. I think we're at a different crossroads right now in the United States. Granted, the context in comparison to Chile is quite different. We have incredible amounts of polarization, inequality, and yes, gaslighting. Gaslighting is meant to drain you, it's meant to create confusion and chaos. You don't even know what to believe anymore. You don't even know what's true anymore, right? This is what gaslighting is doing to us. It's actually a very effective political strategy by those who perpetuate it if we let them. But as activists remind us, we must continue to be engaged, to be thoughtful, to be inquisitive about the world. We must resist and persist. Gaslighting also takes us to false equivalency. False equivalency is this premise that two arguments are always on equal footing, or that we live in a binary world, or that there's only two sides to every issue. All of this is a false premise. The world is far more complicated. And activists understand this, and they engage in their movements understanding this complexity. So when 99%, for instance, of climate scientists say, we are in a crisis, time is running out, then climate change deniers are not on an equal footing, or any footing, for that matter. Because ideology cannot shape the parameters of a public debate or public policies, right? Ideology is not science. It's not facts-based research, right? And again, activists understand this. So, how do we cultivate discernment? I think we cultivate discernment by remembering who is working from a place of love and hope and who is clearly not. If another world is possible, like the World Social Forum imagined, then we must continue to be engaged in the world. We must continue to discern what is happening in the world. Complacency is not an option. Complacency is not an option. One of the things that I take great inspiration by are the activists I see doing their thing in the world. So when I see, for instance, Greta Thunberg of Sweden speaking so passionately about climate crisis, I see love and hope. These are the essential ingredients to activism. When she's chastising those adults in the room who haven't done enough, I see love and hope there. When I recently spoke to an activist in Santiago about what was happening there in Chile, I could hear the love and hope in her voice as she described fighting for a better Chile. And when I saw Puerto Rican protesters celebrating that weeks of protests led to the resignation of Governor Rosello, I saw love and hope there too. This is why I think of them as the essential ingredients to activism. And so we must take great, inspiration at what these movements are cultivating, because there's a lot of us who are actually quite engaged in the world right now. There's a number of us who've been mobilized to act. And this is why I think we are at a particular critical juncture in this country right now as well. And so let's applaud those elementary school teachers who are advocating for their struggling students. Let's appreciate those community members who are volunteering and helping the elderly by bringing them food or basic necessities. And let's honor those activists who are organizing massive demonstrations to say enough. From the women's marches to the science marches, from Black Lives Matter to March for Our Lives to end gun violence. It has been an inspiring, in some ways, few years, the ways in which they've been able to mobilize public dissent. I take great inspiration from this. One of the things that activists have been very openly speaking about now is the need for self-care. If we are not good to ourselves, if we do not take the breaks that we need, if we do not ask for help when needed, then this becomes unsustainable. And so take the breaks you need, be good to yourselves. This is what's needed in order for social justice activism to continue. I think in closing that I would like to remind you how important it is to hold hope closely. We're living in a very dark time. I don't want to sort of minimize the big challenges that are before us. But we must continue to hold on to hope, because as my colleague Patricia told me once, if we become hopeless, we become defeated. So we must resist defeat. We must not succumb to an anger that somehow now clouds our judgment. We must see each other, that we're activated in huge numbers right now. We must appreciate that we're coming to the table with what we're able to offer. If we do this together, we can remember that with love, with hope, with compassion, with empathy, with solidarity, by speaking truth to power, another world is possible, and it's coming. It only takes love and hope. Thank you.